Okay, welcome back to this last session of the Bird Monitoring India Symposium. So first, some bad news. We were supposed to have a live talk by Camila Gomez, but unfortunately, there's been some rather catastrophic mix-up in the time difference between us in India and her in Colombia. And so we don't have her online, and we will not be able to have her online for another hour. So we thought rather than postponing her talk for an hour and asking everybody to come back after an hour, we will rather ask her to record her talk, and we'll upload a recording here on the channel. And you'll be able to view it and ask questions in Discord, and hopefully Camila will be able to take questions on Discord, and this can be done. Our apologies for that. There was always going to be some something that went wrong. This is the one thing that went wrong this time. I think this is the only thing that went wrong. So if you are watching and hoping to see Camila Gomez, I'm very sorry, but her talk will be available, and we'll put that up when the recording is ready. So what we're going to do instead is to go directly to our closing. And I will start by saying a few words, and then I'll hand over to Preeti. So my name is Suhail. I'm one of the members of the organizing committee. But I have to confess that I've not done a great deal this year. Every year when we discuss and say, should we do, when should we organize the next edition of this bird monitoring symposium? The previous one is far in the past and our memories have faded. And so we're like, oh yeah, we've done it twice before. It shouldn't be too hard at all to do it again. And we have support from wonderful people, all over the place. And so we can do this. And of course, every year it turns out that it's a lot more work than we had remembered. And this year, the person who shouldered most of that is Preeti. And also, of course, with able assistance from other people in the organizing committee, from Monica Kaushik, from Varun Kher, from the people who support us from behind, that is behind the scenes, hidden behind computer screens and so on, Amit and Tamilan. But it's always a lot of work. It's a lot of work to plan and to execute. This year, we had two mini symposia anchored by Vijay Ramesh yesterday and today by Ramnaran K. And they did an amazing job. So that actually did make it quite a bit easier. But I think the first thing to say is that, it is a fair bit of work that goes on behind the scenes, and I don't take any credit. But there are people who've spent hours and hours of their lives on this. So we do hope that you enjoyed it. You found it meaningful, and you came away with something new that you learned, or with a new renewed sense of purpose and energy for the work that you do. For bird monitoring in India, generally, I thought I had some reflections based on today's discussion on long-term sort of resurveys, and yesterday's discussion about bird monitoring through acoustics, through bioacoustics. And that is like the as Dhananjay Mohan pointed out in the discussion this afternoon, we really do need a really well thought out and systematic monitoring program for birds that spans the country as a whole, not just particular locations or particular habitats, but all over the place, representative way that covers habitats that are changing fast, including urban landscapes, agricultural landscapes, areas outside protected areas, and so on. And how we're going to do that, what method is going to be used, who would need to be involved in this, how might one even approach such a thing, or such a huge scale a monitoring program that would happen, let's say, year to year. That would be quite a task. So this is something that we need to think about. If you have ideas on how we can do this, how we can maybe combine human-based monitoring, so human sensors with digital sensors, like with audio, then that would be presumably really effective, both cost-effective as well as covering species that we may not be able to cover fully through human observers alone. And this is something that we need to discuss in the days to come. So quick update, it looks like Camilla has joined, so we will have her talk, I think. Camilla, if you can just unmute and confirm if that's possible in about 5 minutes time.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So I will just finish my little speech, and then Camilla can talk about Preeti, you can wind up right at the end. So yes, so the idea is to keep our Discord server open beyond the span of this particular conference, and that's the reason we're on Discord, is so that we can keep the channels open and we can continue to discuss with each other, learn from each other, coordinate with each other, collaborate with each other. So after this conference is ended, please do take advantage of that. Keep in touch with your new friends. Keep asking questions, and from our side, we'll try to keep conversations going as well. And just remind you, there's also a feedback form posted in the lounge, I believe, in one of the channels. So do let us know what you thought of this conference, so that we can do it bigger and better next time. Presumably continuing to be an online conference rather than in person, or perhaps a hybrid conference. So again, this is something that we need your input from. So for me, one of the organizers, Suhail here, I'm going to say goodbye, and I'll hand it over to I think Ram, who's going to take over and introduce Camilla, and we can get on with the talk. And I'm really glad that Camilla's been able to join, and we've not had to scrap that part of the schedule. So thanks a lot, and do stay tuned. We're getting Camilla's keynote talk in just a few minutes.
Thank you, Suhail, and a very good morning to Camilla. And sorry to all our friends who are watching for this confusion in time zones. And so we're back on track. We had actually leapfrogged to closing, but now we revert back to this very interesting keynote talk by Camilla on the Columbia resurvey. I'll just introduce her. She's a Colombian ornithologist. She did a PhD in ecology and the stopover behavior of neotropical birds at the Universidad de los Andes. I hope I got that somewhat right. And was a Rose postdoctoral fellow at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology from 2018 to 2021. She is a founding member of the science and conservation group SELVA and currently works there as Director of Education and Training. She leads and manages research projects within the migratory ecology and conservation science programs. She also designs and implements SELVA's training courses while supporting education initiatives and managing the grants program. She especially likes working with students, with community leaders, and loves fieldwork and the development of research ideas. We are really privileged and excited to hear from her about the bird resurvey project in Colombia, South America. With that, welcome Camilla, and I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Ramnaryan. I'm going to share my screen now. Yes. Oh, can someone enable me to share the screen, please?
Yes, you should be able to share screen.
Right. Okay. So it's a really early morning for me today. So I have here my coffee. I'm really sorry I was a little bit late. Time differences always play tricks on us. But I am going to talk to you today about the Columbia Resurvey Project, assessing changes in bird communities over a century of landscape transformation. This is a project that has been going on since 2019. And it's really based on these expeditions, a series of expeditions led by Frank Chapman during 1911 to 1914. He led a series of expeditions for the American Museum of Natural History in the United States to document bird diversity and distribution in Colombia. And these naturalists were among the first people to do this in detail for the whole Andean region of Colombia and other countries in South America as well. In 2019, a group of researchers, Colombian researchers this time, got together to plan to resurvey some of Chapman's sites. So it's a group led initially by Professor Gustavo Castan, who recently passed away in 2020, and other professors and students and PhD students and postdocs in Colombia to try and repeat and resurvey these expeditions that Frank Chapman had led and understand what had happened in 100 years. So these are the sites that Frank Chapman surveyed, all of these green dots. As you can see, this is, if you're not familiar with the geography of South America, this is Colombia, which is located at the northeast of South America. And you can see the Andes region runs north-south. So these sites were pretty much all Andean, both lowland and highland sites. And we decided to tackle 6 regions from those to resurvey. These are their names: Toche, Honda, Fusagasugá, San Agustin, Morelia, and Barbacoas. And we did that from 2019 to 2021. These are some sites, photographs of the sites, and they were selected on purpose to be quite different in terms of elevation. So Toche, for instance, is an Andean site, quite high elevation. Fusagasugá is low elevation, also Andean in the eastern Andes. There's Honda, which is a low elevation site, dry tropical forest. Morelia, even lower elevation. San Agustin is a higher elevation in a different Andean range. And Barbacoas is a lowland elevation site in the very western part of the Andes of Colombia. And they also differ not only in elevation, but in amount of transformation that they've suffered throughout the years. So there's sites like, say, Toche and Fusagasugá, who have suffered really, really high landscape transformation, forest fragmentation, just complete changes. Large towns and cities have been built, while others like Barbacoas have remained pretty much stable over 100 years. There's not much that has gone on in those regions. So we wanted to see whether transformation, not only on landscape, but just temporal transformation, has influenced community changes in the birds. So in 1911 to 1914, these naturalists, what they did, or their methods, were pretty much specimen collecting. They went out, collected everything that they could find, and put together these huge collections that are now hosted in various museums in North America primarily. So they're pretty much all based in the American Museum of Natural History, and other universities such as Cornell have a portion of these huge collections. In the modern surveys, we did a mixture of methods. We carried out standardized surveys through point counts, repeated point counts, and there was also some specimen collection. The specimen collecting went on, it was carried out in the field, and these new collections are now hosted mostly at the Instituto de Ciencias Naturales in the National University of Colombia. So methods have some similarities and some differences. While in the historical surveys, they used mostly shotguns to collect birds, we used mostly mist netting. So you can start to see that there's some fundamental differences between the two data sets that we're going to compare. And so to compare these two very different data sets, what we did was we just wanted to see species richness, basically, and compare between the specimens and the surveys and the specimens that we collected. What were the differences between those bird communities that were detected in each of the communities? For the historical data sets, we also have an index of relative abundance, which is basically the number of specimens collected in a given day times 100 to have a value between 0 and 1 for the abundance, relative abundance. With this, we assume that the number of specimens collected in a day somewhat reflect the abundance of a bird in a site. The journals from the expeditions have helped us understand that these naturalists were actually very, very detailed in how they were documenting the birds, and they did try to get everything they could and a set number of specimens for each one. So we think that this relative abundance index is a good indicator of how abundant a bird was in a site. For the modern resurveys, we had standardized repeated point counts. So we did occupancy models to understand the probability of occurrence and relative abundance of a bird in a site. And we also have the specimens. So we mixed those two to get values of relative abundance and probability of occurrence at a site for a given species. One last thing I want to say is that because of the inherent difference between these two data sets, we can be very or quite certain that birds that were not detected in a modern survey are actually extirpated from a site, but we can't be that certain that new species that we detected on the modern sites were actually absent in the past. So please take that into account while you see the next few graphs of the results. So the other thing that we did, apart from comparing the relative composition and richness of species of the two communities in the past and present, is we evaluated the functional differences between these communities by taking in account morphological and natural history traits of the species within each community at each of these regions, and then estimate functional traits such as functional richness, functional diversity, functional uniqueness, and see the distributions of those functional traits within communities and how they've changed in the past and in the present. These are the 9 traits that we chose to compare. So basically traits that describe the diet of birds, such as bill length and bill width, dispersal abilities such as the hand-wing index and measurements of the wing, the tail, and the tarsi, body mass, generation time, and habitat breadth to understand natural history traits such as specificity of habitats and dispersal ability. What we did is we take all these traits, put them together in a PCA, and get sort of an evaluation of how functional morphology and diversity behaves within a bird community. Okay, so I'm going to go straight into the results. This is a comparison. This graph shows a comparison just of species richness. On the x-axis, you can see all our 6 different sites, and you can see the historical number of species is in the blue bar, and the survey and specimen bars are the modern resurveys. You can see that in almost all cases, the blue line, the black bar is just the overall species richness. And what I want you to notice in this bar graph is that most blue bars are higher, with a few exceptions, such as on the here, are higher than the historical sites. So even though the methodologies were very, very different, the naturalists in the past didn't really know the birds they were going to survey. They did get more species in most of the sites than we did in the modern surveys. That is something to take into account when I show you the next slides. This is the proportion of species that were extirpated. As I told you a little while ago, we can be pretty certain that these birds that weren't detected in the modern surveys were actually absent, and it's not a detectability issue. We can't be so sure of the new species we detected weren't present in the past. But this is the proportion of birds that were extirpated from each one of the sites in red. So as you can see right here, the gray is the proportion of new species. The red is the proportion of not recorded, and the blue is the proportion of shared species between the two periods. In the different sites, you can see that the proportions are huge. So 42% of the species that were detected in the past were not detected, for instance, in the modern surveys in this site, 63% in Florencia, 47, 26. So between 25 and 63% of the species that we detected in the modern survey, that were not detected in the modern surveys, were detected in the past. Those are huge community changes, if you ask me. And there's quite a large variation between sites. So Onda, Toche, and San Agustin. Onda is a lowland site. Toche and San Agustin are highland sites. Lost less species and had more new species. Okay, and these graphs basically show the probability of occurrence estimated from modern surveys with occupancy models and the historical relative abundance of species. So basically, I want you to concentrate in these lower quadrants here that show species that were relatively abundant in the historical surveys and that were either extirpated or have very low abundances in the modern surveys. And when we go through, I'm going to show you one of these graphs for each one of the sites. You can see that there's various characteristics that are shared between the birds that were lost or that have very low abundances today. You can see insectivores, large frugivores, nocturnal birds, and hummingbirds. Understory insectivores are some of the species that seem to be very abundant in the past and that have low abundances today, or that have been extirpated, like this understory insectivore and this large frugivore, an Andean parrotlet. Other examples, another site, Fusagasugá, tanagers, large frugivores again, insectivores, understory insectivores, mountain tanagers, ant birds as well are some of the birds that disappeared or that have very low abundances in the modern surveys. Onda, again, we can see understory frugivores, jacamars, ant birds, and tanagers, again, changing in abundance. This is quite repetitive, but it makes a really good point that despite the huge diversity in these sites, some of the birds that have changed the most are pretty common. So again, large frugivores, in this case, a thrush, quite a common thrush, tanagers, understory insectivores, and hummingbirds. And again, lots of ant birds, frugivores, again, large tanagers and understory insectivores, like this one. This was one of the sites that had the largest number of extirpated species. Okay, and in terms of the functional diversity, I wanted to compare the functional richness in terms of a hypervolume. So basically a volume of 9 dimensions with the 9 different traits that we have. And it's another estimate of functional richness, basically the volume of that hypervolume, the area that it covers. And you can see these are the data for functional richness for historical and modern surveys. For each, the lines connect the same sites. Here are the color codes for the 6 different sites. And for 4 of the 6 sites, there was a larger volume in the modern resurvey. So there were lots of more new species that were recorded. This is not only doesn't really take into account the number of species, but the functional diversity of those species. So the functional area that the traits of these new communities have is larger generally in the modern surveys than in the historical ones, which was surprising given the number of species that were extirpated. There were also a large number of species that were new, so they are recovering some of that functional diversity that was lost with the extirpated species. And this value is basically the value of the hypervolume that was unique to modern and to historical sites. So there's proportion between 5 and 10% of the volume of the historical sites, the functional volume that was unique and that was lost. But again, there was a large proportion between 15 and 20% of that volume that's unique to modern resurveys. So all of those unique species that we detected in the present that weren't detected in the past are actually contributing a significant proportion of functional volume for those communities. And these are the graphs for that 3-dimensional space. The volume really has 9 dimensions, but we can't really visualize that. So for the first 3 dimensions, which are basically the first axis, the first 3 axes of our PCA for the traits, you can see that volume of functional diversity. And the colors again reflect red, species that were extirpated, that weren't present in the past and not present at the modern resurveys. The blue are species that are unique to modern resurveys, and gray in between are species that are shared between the two periods. And when you scan through each one of the sites, you can get a feel of how that volume, how that functional volume has changed in time. There are sites like Fusagasugá and San Agustin, which I've highlighted in red, that have huge areas of red functional space. All that functional space has disappeared today. Today we have the gray and the blues, and so you can see those communities have changed radically in terms of the functionality. Onda, which is not significant, but it still has a huge portion of functional volume that was present in the historical community, and that is gone today. Other regions such as Toche, Florencia, and Barbacoas, this last Barbacoa site is the lowland site that hasn't changed that much in terms of habitat transformation, but it has had some areas of its functional volume primarily focused on the lower end of PC1 and higher end of PC3, which is body size and specialization in habitat, that have been lost. So basically small species and habitat specialists have been lost, despite there not being so much habitat transformation at these sites. But I think these graphs are really, really cool to actually visualize how these communities are so dynamic in time, and they change pretty significantly. This is again another visualization of these same changes, but at 2 dimensions. So this is the trait probability density of the PC1, which is basically describing body size in this case. And as you can see, that red curve describes the species that were extirpated and that were lost. So medium-sized species for some localities, very small species for other, large species in other that have been lost, and that others, that very small species that have joined the community. So this just basically gives you another tool to look at how these communities have changed in function over time. Going back a little bit, I was just going to show you PC number 1, PC2 and 3, and up to PC9 don't really have significant changes over time. And this is another metric of functional diversity, which is functional uniqueness. And it describes basically how unique a certain species is compared to the whole community that it belongs to. If it's basically similar to everyone else or very different functionally and morphologically. And I compared in groups of species for those species that were extirpated, for the new additions, and for the shared species, whether there was a difference in functional uniqueness. My hypothesis, based on a previous study, is that species that are extirpated are more likely to be functionally unique than those that aren't. And the results for the various localities was very different. So in the localities that are highlighted in red, there seems to be a pattern where, yes, extirpated species seem to have higher values of functional uniqueness, as well as new additions. Some new additions are very functionally unique. But in other cases, that was not the case. Species that were extirpated were not necessarily functionally unique. Again, this highlights the great diversity of things that are going on in these localities, and probably the very different factors that are driving the changes in community composition in each. Probably not the same thing happening everywhere, which is still really interesting to know. Okay, so that's, I hope I gave you a big picture of what these changes have the changes that have occurred in the landscape. This is a really cool photograph taken in 1915 by Frank Chapman of the same site, and of the same site we resurveyed in the modern, in 2019 in this case. This one is Toche, and you can see the amount of habitat transformation that has gone on. So it is huge. This was all paramo and forest covered mountains, and today it's a fragmented landscape full of patches of forest, cattle pastures, pine plantations. The line of the edge of the Paramo has gone up in elevation as well, signaling not only human-induced landscape transformation, but potentially climate change as well. So these huge transformations, it's not surprising that we're seeing, bird community changes, but it is the first time that we can actually picture this for a neotropical site that doesn't really have long-term monitoring that goes on permanently. So it's pretty cool to be able to compare these information data sets. And so to conclude a little bit, for each one of the sites and for each one of the general findings that we had in sites like Fusagasugá and San Agustín, which are like mid-elevation sites, we had high habitat transformation, high species loss, and high functional resilience loss. So very large differences in the functional diversity of these sites, potentially signaling that the ecosystem function has also changed radically. There's other sites such as Barbacoas, which is a lowland that has had low habitat transformation compared to the other sites. Even with this, there's loss of previously abundant species, which is curious given that the habitat is still there. And there is not much relative loss of functional resilience. So the community is pretty much stable, but there have been changes in the actual composition of the community, which is curious and requires some more research. And in lowland sites such as Honda and Morelia, there's been high habitat transformation, high species loss and gain, and high proportional community changes, but not necessarily functional changes coupled with that. So again, a different case that ought to be studied in more detail. That was sort of the scientific part of my talk, but this project also involved a large education and social component, which is really unique, and it was really well done. So one of the ideas of this project is that we can start documenting for the future. I'm not sure if that is the same case in India, but at least in Colombia and Latin America, long-term monitoring of bird populations and in general biodiversity is basically non-existent. There's very, very few examples of long-term projects of monitoring. And we thought that this resurvey project was a good start to be able to generate awareness and pride campaigns for the birds and basically train up groups that would be able to monitor birds for the future. We are the country with the largest diversity of birds in the world, and citizen science has grown immensely. So we are betting on citizen science to be our bird monitors of the future. This project had a huge education campaign with kids where they learned to identify birds, went out birding, learned about the expeditions, mapped the birds on their territory, and shared knowledge with the scientists to become the scientists of the future. And finally, I just want to acknowledge that the hard work of getting all the data together was carried out by a large group of people, mostly Colombian people from all the different regions, but also international collaborators who have been really, really helpful and supportive of this project. And now I'm happy to take any questions if there's any.
Thank you, Camilla. That was really very comprehensive and very revealing presentation. We had 3 talks earlier from the Americas, and there are some certain stark differences between what you share and what the others shared. But definitely a lot of the entire process has garnered a lot of interest. I'm as a birder, and I'm probably exempt from apologizing for waking you up so early in the morning. But thank you very much, and very grateful to have you here. I am going to read out some questions that are on Discord, and then we'll take your answers from there onwards. The first question from Karthik is, in the graphs showing proportions of species shared, new and not recorded, is the denominator the number of species recorded historically? If so, shouldn't the 3 proportions add up to 1? Sorry if I missed something.
Okay, let me just put that graph back on. Oh, wait. There you go. Okay. So you mean this one, right? So these do not necessarily add to 1 because there's shared species. So I've got 42 plus 6, 50 something, which is the percentage of all the different, the added proportion of the whole, the 3 different ones. So they do not add to 1 because there's shared species that add up to both historical and modern. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, I'll wait for Karthik to respond, but meanwhile, I'll pose you the second question. Preeti asks this: has there been any monitoring of insect abundances in the steady area, since you mentioned decline in the insectivorous bird species?
That is a great question, and there has not been any monitoring of insect abundance declines. And it is something that has been noted, but by many other researchers as well. There's decline of not only understory insectivores, which is something that we have highlighted from all these forest areas, but also aerial insectivores are in trouble and seem to be declining, even in areas with good habitat, not really landscape transformation. So definitely there's something going on with the insects. There's this science paper that shows a general world decline in insects as well. Probably the high use of pesticides for agriculture and on these things are affecting insects in ways that we don't know, and that carries over up to up the food chain. In the case of understory insectivores, there might be a decline in habitat in insects, but mostly these birds are really bad at dispersing, most of them. So they require, shady, dense vegetation, and they won't venture outside anything that's that. So habitat transformation affects them radically. So we think that's what the reason pretty much. But in the case of barbacoas, there were also some understory insectivores that were lost. So definitely something going on with the insects.
Thank you. This is yet another question. I'm going to go. I am curious to know the reasons for the decline in hummingbirds, nectarivorous birds. Does decline mean local extinction, or species have shifted ranges distributions to track their resources? Is hunting a threat and the reason for loss of large-bodied birds?
Okay, so first, the hummingbirds. That's really, really interesting. These are local extinctions, mostly. So these aren't species that are generally extinct in the whole country or their whole distribution range, just local. They might be found outside this region in pristine areas. But again, these birds, which are, as you say, trackers of resources, do depend on habitat mostly, and very specific habitat, and most depend on very specific plants, that when habitat is transformed and these plants are lost, these birds are just extirpated from an area. And they are very functionally unique as well, hummingbirds. They have very different morphologies and ecologies. And so they play a very distinct role in bird communities in the neotropics. So we think that it's more like a habitat and plant loss effect more than a range shifting looking for other resources. There is no, for these most birds, there's not much hunting pressure. But for the large birds, there is some hunting pressure and some, there's a dual effect for the loss of the large-bodied species. One is that they mostly require large areas of habitat as well. When habitat is fragmented, we lose some of these large-bodied birds. And large-bodied frugivores seem to be very, very sensitive, more sensitive than others to fragmentation. That's a fact that we already know. Some of these species do suffer from hunting. Large-bodied birds are hunted for food, like curassows or things like that. Big birds that have lots of meat, they are eaten in some regions. And there's also some pressure from trafficking, especially parrots suffer a lot from trafficking, illegal trafficking, and that's also a pressure that does exist in many regions in this country.
There are a couple of more questions. One is, do you have plans of resurveying the same areas again in some number of years? And if so, will you follow the same methodology?
Yes, we do have plans of carrying this on. And the idea is that we're going to count on citizen scientists locally to carry on, birding and getting data into eBird, and we can use that remotely to start seeing more continuous changes in time and as changes occur sort of in real time. So definitely that is a priority for many groups in the country, to set up constant monitoring efforts throughout the country, not only at these sites, but everywhere else.
Thank you. And one more question to do with frugivores. Some of the sites in your results seem to show a loss of frugivores, large-bodied. Work in other regions of the globe have seen large-bodied frugivore loss associated with downstream effects like vegetation community shifts towards reduced above-ground carbon storage. Are any such effects known from these sites?
There is only one of the sites, which I did a previous study, which was also a site surveyed by Chapman, in where there is an effect shown in the structure of the actual forest because of the lack of these frugivores. So these frugivores are dispersers of very specific seeds, large seeds of big trees that take a long time to grow. And these trees are basically lost from the structure of the forest when the birds are gone. So there is a significant effect of the loss of these frugivores in the actual structure of the whole ecosystem. They do have an important effect, and it's been shown only for one site that has the data, but I'm sure that lots of other things are going on at these sites that haven't been evaluated in that detailed way.
While we are waiting for some questions on Discord, I have some questions for you. So you've done this comprehensive research across many sites across Colombia. Have there been any policy implications, on the ground conservation implications, which y'all have been able to influence through this work? If so, could you share some examples?
Okay, so not yet. However, this is a research that has sort of grabbed the attention of government institutions that are responsible for policy and for biodiversity conservation in the country. And they are very aware of the need, for example, of installing long-term monitoring and evaluating what's going on, because they're aware of the high changes that have occurred in time. So at least we have grabbed their attention, and they are aware of the importance not only of bird communities, but of long-term monitoring. So I think it's the first step to get some conservation work on the ground and some policy and interest to protect biodiversity and bird diversity in general. It was a first step.
Thank you. I have one more question from Discord for you. You briefly mentioned this, but can you tell us a bit more about the educational program run by your team in the study area?
Yeah, that was really, really cool. So basically we had two lines of the education. One was sort of targeted at children and young members of the community, and it was meant to increase awareness about birds and teach about bird ID and use of citizen science tools such as eBird and Merlin that are so useful in terms of creating citizen scientists that can monitor a local community. And so we generated activities for the kids. Some were type bird detective type things, or expeditions, because we were talking about expeditions. So there were kid expeditions and talking about what's an expedition. We went out birding. We started identifying the birds. There was also an activity to map birds in your territory, so using sounds. So they constructed sound maps that they could then interact with digitally. Some of these sites have no internet and no cell phone coverage, so it was done with stickers on the walls. That were some of the maps that I showed in the back. And so all of these activities help to sort of plant the seed of groups of kids and young people that get together now locally. They live at these sites. Most are rural and remote sites that don't get much, much of anything. I'm sure you're aware of how those go. And so these kids are now really interested birders, some of them at least, and are starting to contribute data as citizen scientists. And there was the whole other aspect of the project, which was involving local communities in the actual scientific work of their surveys. So there were local people that were helping with all the logistics. They were trained. They watched and participated in the surveys with the scientists and learned the methodologies. They learned to carry them out, learned the importance, and then we went back and socialized the results with them again. Because many researchers go to sites, take out things, and leave and never come back. Publish their research, and communities don't really get anything back. And we made sure that these communities were actively involved, contributed their knowledge as well, exchanged with the researchers, and received the information back from everything that we found at their localities and through the project. There's always, I always think that you can't do enough in terms of education. As researchers, we have to invest a lot of time and effort in trying to share what we do and involve and exchange knowledge with people that don't come necessarily from academic backgrounds. And this project had some of that, which was really interesting. The relationships that we forged with the communities were really special. And I think it planted an important seed of awareness in the public and interest in birds and in learning about the history and to document for the future.
Camilla, we don't want to let you go, so we have a couple of more questions. But first, on a note from many of us, I want to say that this aspect about your involvement of local communities and, handing over tools to them and encouraging them to be the first line of bird surveyors is something that a lot of us are also trying to do over here. And I know that from eBird events, Colombia and India kind of compete to kind of post the most checklist and the most species. So it's a good, healthy competition. And it's great to actually meet somebody from Colombia and, learn from you. There is one more last question about about mixed species flocks in your study area. And have you found any long-term changes in mixed species flock during your resurveys?
That is such a good question. And it's something that we can't really evaluate because the historical data set doesn't really account for the mixed species flock. In the modern surveys, we are documented any individual that was seen within a flock. We have that data. And I guess we have from the historical specimens, we know from the natural history of the species whether some species belong to multiple species flocks or not. But it's something that we have not evaluated yet. It would be super interesting to see if we could get any aspect of data from the historical data set, because it would be hard to get, but it would be super interesting. I bet there's changes, but I don't know.
Thank you, Camilla. On that note, very grateful once again, and hopefully this will be a long connection with you and with Colombia, with researchers and with local communities getting together. On that note, I am going to hand over to Preeti and Monica to do the wrap up and the final session. Once again, thank you, Camilla.
Okay, thanks everyone for inviting me and for listening. It was lovely to get to share this with you and to meet you all virtually.
Thank you so much, Camilla. It was really nice and inspiring. And we really hope that we could hear you again at some platform with probably more results. Just the photographs of birds were so fascinating that I wanted to come to Colombia, volunteer for your work. But yeah, okay. So I actually wanted to, I was earlier thinking that I would not do this, but I wanted to formally thank Suhail, Preeti, and other member of organizing committee who have been a backbone of bird monitoring symposium in India, who conceived this idea. So I'm formally thanking Preeti, Suhail, and other members. And most importantly, our presenter, they made out time for 2 days of engagement despite medical emergencies, bad networks. There were network issues, time differences, Camilla. And our two amazing mini symposium coordinator who have been coordinating in the middle of their fieldwork. Volunteers on Discord made sure that the conversation was streamlined. So I really thank all the volunteers. Our technical team ensured a smooth streaming as well as were toggling across platforms. And most importantly, I thank all the participants for engaging actively on Discord, asking very important, relevant questions. And with this, I want to make a request to all the participants. Because we get this inspiration and encouragement from your question and engagement. The request I have from you is to please provide your honest, critical feedback so that we can provide you a much better symposium, and do tell us what you want from us, as in the questions, tools, and techniques that you want us to cover in coming years. Please keep engaging on Discord channel. And that's all about it. Thank you so much. And I hand over to Preeti now.
Thank you, Monica. And also thank you, Camilla. Sorry about the time zone mix-up once again to you and to all the participants. Despite all the mix-up, we managed to have you and hear about your wonderful, wonderful work. It was really exciting. And Ram said already, that there are so many parallels between the Indian scenario and the Colombian scenario. So it's really nice to listen to you. Thanks so much. Monica has already thanked really important key people in the symposia, but I also want to take this opportunity to say thank you to some people who have been involved in organizing this and at the back end. First of all, I would like to thank all the poster and talk presenters from the last 2 days. It really is very nice to see every year. Oh, we have Camilla's little one join us. Hi. Sorry, I'll go on. We have every year representation from across the country, and I think that what makes the Bird Monitoring Symposium unique is that we have people from various parts of India represent their work. We've often considered whether we should, make this symposium in person, but sometimes it's really difficult to travel across the country and make it to a particular location. But in our feedback form, we have questions about what kind of format you would like to see for the symposium going ahead. And please do take the feedback form. Once again, a quick reminder. I've had a really nice 2 wonderful days listening to the various speakers and at both the mini symposia. And big thank you to Ram and Vijay for coordinating this and moderating this. Our publicity material for the symposium was designed by Janvi Rajan, and my sincere thanks to her as well. It has been wonderful to have Camilla and Laurel, 2 keynote speakers from across the world at the symposium. And once again, thank you to both of them. At this symposium, we have tried over the last 2 to 3 years to build a community of people who come together every year to share their work. And every year we have a few new people joining in. We try to keep the Discord server live and continue to interact over the Discord server. In the past, we have had a few instances where we try to organize informal interactions and talks. So in our feedback form, we also have a question about this interaction. So please let us know if you would like to keep in touch over this Discord server, whether you'd like to hear occasional talks or whether it's better to have an event like this annually, completely online or in hybrid mode. I would again like to thank Amit and Tamaran, who have been extremely crucial to organizing this event every year and this year as well. Without them, we wouldn't have been able to manage the backend logistics. So thank you both, Amit and Taman, so much. Our volunteers have helped us a lot, keeping discussions organized on Discord. So a big thank you to the volunteers. Our talks and posters will remain on the Discord server for a few more days. We have some requests from some of the speakers and presenters to take down their talks and presentations from the server a little later. So we will, based on request, not post them publicly and keep it only limited to the next few days. So if you haven't had a chance, please browse through all the talks and posters. They're still up on the Discord server. And the beauty of Discord is that we can continue to interact asynchronously and go back, look at posters and talks as well. So please do that. With that, thank you so much. Please take our feedback form. Thank you for joining us for the 2 days, and hope to see you and continue to engage on Discord. We can